Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out on a Saturday morning. And today we have researchers, family researchers. They will tell you how they got started, what resources are available, and a little bit about themselves. Now, I'm Marilyn Campbell with the Louisa County Historical Society, and we are at 214 Fredericksburg Avenue in Louisa, Virginia. And I just want to say that this is part of a program hosted with the NAACP, Louisa County NAACP. And today we're going to hear from those that have ties to Louisa, and they may take you on a journey in their efforts. So today we have panelists Kelly Navies and Larnell Flannagan. We hope that Janice Lawrence does join us, but if not, we want to yield our time to these two speakers, and they will give an overview. And toward the end, we will let you have questions, so just type them in the chat. Thank you. So Kelly Navies, I would like for you to start out on our panel and just tell the audience something about yourself and why you got involved in this effort of family research and how long you've been involved and what are some good resources.
Okay, sure. Let me share my screen for a second. What are you saying? That doesn't look like the right thing. You should be saying that. What are you saying? Hold on, that's not what you're supposed to be saying. Were you guys seeing anything there?
No.
Okay, let's try now. There we go. Okay. So, my name is Kelly Navies, and first I want to say that I am an oral historian, actually, not a genealogist, but genealogy is something that came along with the oral history because I began my road as an oral historian on a family history project, and that was a little over 30 years ago. And with most genealogists, I would say this journey begins with your parents. So I just wanted to show a photograph of my parents, Constance Elaine Gregory and Richard D. Navies, both deceased. So what's interesting is that I started with my mother's side of the family, and it was actually more of a woman-centered journey at that time. And I was following up on stories that my mother had told about her ancestors. And this is a photograph. And so a huge part of my journey has to do with the oral tradition and also family photographs. And those are very important and useful tools for any genealogist, I would say. This particular photo, and I'm sorry that it's not a very good version of this photograph, is a large framed photo that my mother had on her wall and that I've inherited. And what you see is my great-grandmother in the center and my grandmother with her hands in the praying formation and my great aunt Beulah. So this is Connie Alberta is my grandmother, Annie Whiteside is my great-grandmother, and Beulah was my great aunt. And this was, for the longest time, this was such a source of great mystery to me. I wanted to know more about this particular photo. And I think Jenny, and I'll try to make this short. I know we have 15 minutes, so let me wrap this up because this could be a long story. But genealogists start with a lot of curiosity, I would say. And even though I don't claim to be a professional genealogist, again, I want to make sure that I make that clear because I've worked with professional genealogists, and it's definitely a different career path than oral historian. I do use those tools. Now, my mother would talk about Annie Whiteside's mother. And at the time, she didn't know her name. And she would say, my great-grandmother was born in slavery in North Carolina. And she lived to be over 100 years old. And a lot of people will say that, you know, I get this question a lot about oral history. Well, don't people make up stories, this kind of thing? Well, sometimes they do, but in this particular case, once I followed up on the story, my mother turned out to be right. She did embellish a little. She said, "Oh, I think she was born in Africa." You know, wouldn't that have been great? But as research showed, she was born in North Carolina. She was born in slavery in the 1850s. This is a photo of my grandmother and all 7 of her sisters. And I ended up, and what I'm doing is trying to make a long story short, but I ended up going to almost each of these women, although my grandmother was deceased, but each of these women, except for Aunt Greta, who's the one seated on I guess would be your right. But everyone else I was able to interview about their grandmother. And I was able to eventually get an image. And this is Elizabeth Gudger Stevens. And so what happened was, this was through a combination of, remember, this is back in the 1990s, really late 80s, 1990s, when I was doing this work. This is before you had internet resources. So I ended up writing to the librarians in Asheville, North Carolina, and they did research for me, and they found newspaper articles. And then I also wrote the courthouse in Asheville for the records, vital statistics. And when I was able to find actual records. So this is one of the articles that the librarian found and sent to me. You know, this is what, and I'm a librarian as well. I'm also a trained librarian. At that time I wasn't. At that time I was just an undergraduate student, actually, when I began this work. And but I later become a librarian. And so I really have a lot of respect for these women who did this research and cut these clippings and sent them to me, you know, and you just had to send a quarter. Some people might remember those days for postage, right? And this, we found the death certificate, and I got so much information. I know we're told that you can't find records about enslaved people, but in this particular case, I found a record. I found names and the names of the plantations or the farms that they lived on, because they weren't really large plantations in Asheville. But it tells you here that she was owned by Henry Penland, and that her mother also belonged to the Penlands, and that her father belonged to the Gudgers. So I got all of that information just from this newspaper article, as well as the names of all her siblings, one of whom was my great grandmother, Annie Whiteside, who's listed there, Annie Whiteside of Washington, D.C. And these are her other siblings. So this was a very, very important tool along the way on that particular journey. So on my mother's side of the family, I was able to go with these a couple of steps. I was able to go back to my great grandparents, who are listed here as Sam and Ann, who were enslaved in Buncombe County, North Carolina. And that's on that side of the family. And that was really just tracing. I was going back through the women. I went from my mother to her mother, Connie Alberta, to her mother, Annie Whiteside, to her mother, Betty, who's also known as Elizabeth. That's the other thing. You have to really be careful. Names change a lot. And of course, Betty is short for Elizabeth, but that didn't hit me at first. And I started to see her listed different ways in different records. Census tract, sometimes she's Elizabeth, and then the papers refer to her as Aunt Betsy, which is Elizabeth. It took me a while to put that together. We eventually found the marriage record for Elizabeth Gudger Stevens and Sam Gudger Stevens. And at first it didn't hit me that was the same person, but that's something that you have to be attuned to. And also sometimes middle names are used as well. Names are very important. So you have to be listening very carefully to people and paying close attention to the records and the dates all along, because sometimes names are spelled incorrectly. Sometimes you see them spelled different ways in different documents. But so you have to look at the dates and the other associations to make sure that you are looking at the right individual. In this particular case, of course, my great grandmother's name is actually listed, so there's no doubt that this was her mother. So, I mean, these are the things that you have to look at when you're doing the research. So then and now, again, I wanted to say I'm actually been more invested in oral history in all these years. I hadn't looked at my father's side. And about 2 years ago, just before the pandemic started, my brother and I were launched into a genealogical journey on our father's side, because we came across some old photographs. And so again, photographs are very, very important to the study of genealogy. This is a photograph that we were aware of, but we came across another one as well. This one, we knew this was our great grandfather and his wife. and they're Carters. I did know I had interviewed a great aunt. So again, oral history has been a part of this journey. And how much time do I have left? Because I need to wrap this up, don't I?
Oh, just continue.
Okay, I'll continue.
You're doing a wonderful job.
Okay, great. I just don't want to go over anyone's time. But so this is Mary Victoria and Eugene Edward Carter. We thought the baby was our great grandfather, Hannibal Carter, but I'll get to that a little bit later. But all these years, we thought the baby was Hannibal Carter, who's our great grandfather. Hannibal Carter, I actually met my great grandfather. He lived to his 90s. I met him when I was a little girl in St. Louis. So at the time, this is what I knew about my father's background. I knew that he was born in St. Louis. We knew that his grandmother's parents had some kind of connection to Memphis, that his grandmother had lived in Memphis, Tennessee. But we didn't know much else about that side of the family. And my parents actually both moved to Detroit as children, grew up in Detroit. I was born in Detroit. We moved to California before I was 2. So I grew up in California, all right, just to give you a little nutshell. So remember, my mother's side was fairly simple. They were in North Carolina for several generations and still are. I still have cousins in Asheville, North Carolina, which made that side much easier to research. This side, it turns out there has been movement practically every generation. So this is what really got us going. This particular photograph of a Civil War soldier came into my brother's hands in December 2019 from a distant cousin who was moving and needed to store some items. And she said, this is a very precious box of family photos. Take good care of it. I was over my brother's house in December 2019. We started looking through the photos. He said, you've got to see this particular photo in its original frame, and it was labeled on the back. And we discovered that this was our great-great-grandfather, the same gentleman in the previous photo, Edward Eugene Carter. We hadn't seen this photo before. I think I had heard something about a Civil War connection from this particular aunt. Now, this particular aunt, people tell tall tales. I didn't believe everything she said. I remember years ago, she said something about, yes, our ancestors, they came from Canada. They fought in the Civil War. She had changed the name from Carter to Cartier. And I thought it was a little eccentric. I didn't completely believe it. Like, who would come from Canada to fight in the Civil War? You know what I mean? So I hadn't really gotten back to that story. So I took this to where I work at the Smithsonian. It just so happened that our military curator was there that day. And I showed him the photograph and he says, whoa, those are captain stripes. Like, I had no knowledge. He says, those are captain stripes. Let me look at my book. He wrote a book about Black military officers. So lo and behold, my great grandfather is listed as one of the officers in his book. And you see the name Edward Carter there. And this is just a listing. It's not like he had a separate chapter or anything on him. He just has a listing of Black military officers. And so Edward Carter was a member of the 73rd U.S. Colored Troops that were originally Louisiana Native Guard. Now, look really carefully. And you remember, you see the name beneath that name, and it says Hannibal Carter. And if you recall, my great-grandfather's name was Hannibal Carter. So I looked at this and I said, this can't be a coincidence. Now, this isn't my great-grandfather, because clearly he wasn't alive during the Civil War. But this can't be a coincidence that there's a Hannibal Carter listed right under this Edward Carter, right? So again, you pay attention to names because often names are passed down in families. So from this point, my brother and I went to the National Archives, which is lucky that we're here in Washington, D.C., I have to say, because these are records that are not available online. We went to the National Archives. And again, I used resources around me. I went to the genealogist at the Smithsonian and they said, yes, you need to look at pension records. So keep that in mind. These pension records are available. Once you know that someone has a military record, you can find their military record and their pension record. So we went to the National Archives just before, that's a photo of my brother. We went to the National Archives just before everything shut down for the pandemic, last January 2020. And we were able to confirm that indeed, that was his brother, Edward and Hannibal were brothers, and they both were captains in the Civil War. And from that point, the journey got somewhat simpler because there was documentation on these gentlemen. While I was in the National Archives, I read a document that mentioned that Hannibal Carter was involved in Reconstruction era. He was running for office in Mississippi. So how did they get, so let me just back up. I have to give you guys a map. So it turns out, just to make a long story short here, the Carter brothers were born free in New Albany, Indiana. And their father was also free. He wasn't born free, it turns out, I don't believe, but his name was George Washington Carter. And I found all that because once I left the National Archives, all I had to do was Google Hannibal C. Carter. Who knew this, right? Now we have Google. All this information is on the internet. Hannibal C. Carter was a Reconstruction politician. And so there was information about his family, right? And so it turns out that they were educated in Canada. In fact, Edward was born in Canada. Why the father was moving back and forth between New Albany and Canada probably had to do with his involvement in the Underground Railroad. He was a prominent businessman in New Albany, Indiana. So from that information, and then we do, they say you always get to the complicated part of the story where things aren't as easy. Up to this point, we've been very lucky. We're past the so-called 1870 wall on both sides. They've been able to go past that wall. We're in the mid-19th century. I'm finding all these newspaper articles about actually both of them, because my great-great-grandfather, after the war, he stayed in Mississippi and became a local politician. He was a superintendent of schools. This, of course, is during the short-lived Reconstruction era, right? When Black men were running for office, when Black men were doing different things in local government throughout the South. So they were both involved in that, but they had come from New Albany, Indiana. Now their father, it turns out, had come from Virginia. And this is where Louisa comes in. And this is where different resources come in. This is just some of the things we found in the Civil War pension records. And in the pension records, we found things that they'd written, letters that they'd written, referring to each other, referring to their circumstances. It's fascinating. In fact, I was just there earlier this week, and we can talk about that later. These are the different, I forgot to tell you. Okay. I skipped an important part of the story. So, but anyway, so let me just get back to how I found out he was from Virginia. This was on Ancestry. Well, we knew he was from Virginia, but we didn't know specifically where. And I was on ancestry.com, which now, of course, we have all these online sources. And while I was on ancestry.com, I noticed that his name was in someone else's tree. So I connected with another genealogist who had been working on a branch of the Carter family. And we started communicating, and she was looking at someone named Serena Carter, who was married to a David Nickens in Chillicoth, Ohio, another location. Turns out that Serena and George were siblings, and several different records point to that. We found obituaries, and their families were connected. Serena's daughter, Catherine, was married to Moses Hurst, who was an associate of George Washington Carter and also lived in his home. And we found all this from looking at census records. So again, all this stuff is coming to me through ancestry.com now, because once you start plugging in the names, they pull up documents for you. So I have George Washington Carter listed in the census record as early as 1830 in New Albany, Indiana, as a free colored man. And then again in 1840, and then 1850, and so on. He is murdered. Well, he dies mysteriously in 1878. That's the other part of the story. But I just wanted to back up. The other reason that the name Hannibal Carter jumped out at us when we looked at the book is because one of my brothers is named Hannibal Carter. So my brother here is named after our great grandfather. So of course, that's another reason why that jumped out at me. So far we have 4 different Hannibals in the family because his son is also named Hannibal. So here's, we think, the first Hannibal. And this illustration is the only image we found of Hannibal Carter. And this was in a Black newspaper, his obituary from the Memphis Daily Appeal of 1904. He had actually moved to Chicago. So this side, my father's side of the family, moved practically every generation. So Serena and her sister, Susan, the only definitive record that ties us to Louisa is they were freed by Martha Morris, who was Richard Morris's daughter. And Richard Morris was the owner of the Green Spring Plantation in Louisa. And she freed them in the 1820s, and they went to Chillicoth, Ohio. We did not have a record of the other siblings. So I'm at the point now where I'm still looking for a specific record of George Washington Carver in Louisa, but everything else points to their connection. They were associated with each other. As soon as her husband, David Nichols, dies, she moves to New Albany to be near George Washington Carter. So we know they were connected to one another, but we haven't found a definitive document that says, that George Washington Carter lived on this plantation in Louisa. But this is kind of where we are now. But the important clues have been names. And these are names that we have in my family in each generation. Hannibal, Edward, John, these are siblings, Charles, Anne and Mary, and Richard, which is very interesting because I forgot to mention a very important clue. And this is also on Serena Carter's death certificate. She lists Richard Morris, the white plantation owner, as her father. So it looks like they were the children of Richard Morris, who also had a whole other slew of children by another Black woman who became prominent in Louisville, Kentucky, the Morris family. They had his name. These children took the name of their mother Carter. But it looks like my great-great-great-great-grandfather would be this plantation owner, which is interesting because my father's name is Richard. So this again is another name that has passed down. His uncle's name is also Richard. So things seem to be tying us to that particular family in Louisa County, Virginia. And I will end there for now. And I'm sorry I took so much time.
Oh, that is wonderful information, Kelly, and thank you. We're going to come back to you, but before we go to Lanelle Flanagan, I just wanted to share that Shelley just mentioned that research was being done on the Morris family last night in Louisa. So we're going to come back to that a little later.
Great.
But everyone, I just want you to prepare for Lanelle Flanagan. He is our panelist, and he will give you more background information about himself, as well as what projects he's working on.
Okay, thank you so much. And that information was breathtaking. It motivated me to continue to do more extensive research myself. But to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm originally from Charlottesville, Virginia, but moved away after college and have lived in upstate New York, moved back to Virginia at one point, and lived and worked in Pennsylvania near Philadelphia and Louisiana, Grambling. I've been in higher education as an administrator and faculty member for 31 years, and I just retired 2 years ago. And my intentions have been to continue my genealogy research. But it started in August of 1999, and sorry, I don't have any graphics, but I did send a link to a site in which I was able to help develop family histories of Blacks in Prophet, Virginia. With the Carter G. Woodson Institute, we did a research project. Scott French and myself led a research team to do historical genealogy of African Americans in Prophet, Virginia. And that information, I can give you the website to learn more about that particular project that we developed in 2000. But what I wanted to do was learn more about why did we adopt the name Flanagan? And I would get these replies, or whenever someone, when I tell them my last name, they say Flanagan. Oh, Flanagan. Oh, what kind of, that's Irish, isn't it? I said, yes, it's the adopted slave name, but I don't know all the origins. And so I learned that in August of 1999, I wanted to learn more about the family history. And so I became familiar with a cousin that summer of August of 1999, Pauline Flanagan Johnson, who lived on the land out in Prophet. And so I was directed to her to find out more about the family history. And I'm so glad I did at that point in 1999. Pauline Flanagan Johnson had informed me that there were letters of an enslaved family member that were in the archives at Alderman Library at the University of Virginia. And what her name was Kate Flanagan Coles. And so she was born around 1856. And the Flanagans were property of Richmond Turl. Richmond Turl lived at Prospect Hill in Louisa County. And so the Flanagans were property of Richmond Turl. And so what happened was Richmond Turl moved to Prophet, Virginia, to be closer with his daughter, who married a miner. Her name was Mary Miner. And I think she married, I forgot his name. I don't have it in front of me right now. But the plantation where they lived at was called Gale Hill in Prophet, Virginia. And so Richmond Turl moved closer to live closer with his daughter. And so he purchased land, what was known as Windy Knoll in Esmont. He had his farm there. And so he had some of the Flanagans there, as well as at his daughter's plantation, Gale Hill in Prophet. So the Flanagans moved from Louisa County with Richmond Turl to Windy Knoll in Esmont, as well as some of them, there were 12 children altogether, as well as on the plantation at Gale Hill in Prophet. And so between the two plantations, the Flanagans were property of Richmond Turl, so they would live on the land at Windy Knoll, and they worked out in the, pretty much it was a small farm, but some of the relatives were carriage drivers. They also maintained the stables and house slaves at Windy Knoll, as well as at Gale Hill in Prophet. And so getting back to this great aunt, she was born at Gale Hill in 1856. And Kate Flanagan Coles was taught to read and write. And in her letters and communications, as I view them at Alderman Library back in 2000, she was taught to read and write by her grandmother, the matriarch of the family, and she was named after her. They called her Mammy Kate. She was born in 1790. And so she was a house slave of Richmond Turl. And so Kate learned to read and write from her grandmother. And at the age of 6, she learned how to spell her name and how to, read it. Her grandmother wrote it down and showed her how to write and make the letters. So she learned at age 6 how to read and write. And so a lot of the letters really chronicles the history of the Flanagan family as she communicated with the miners after slavery. Some of them moved to Massachusetts outside of Boston. And as part of her records at Alderman Library, you can see a lot of the letters, and some of them have been transcribed. And so there are about 80, I think there are about 8 boxes of letters and communications of Kate Coles to the minor family. She continued to communicate with them up until the time she passed in 1943. And so a lot of the family history I learned from reading those letters. And so as a part of my research in 2000, as I read these letters, then I also approached the Carter G. Woodson Institute to find out if they were aware of these letters, which they were, as I approached them in '99. And so I partnered with a colleague there, Scott French, who was a part of the Carter G. Woodson Institute at the University of Virginia. And we both developed a grant that we submitted to the Virginia Foundation for the Humanities and Public Policy. We wrote a grant February of 2000 to look at the history of African Americans in Prophet, Virginia. And so through that research, I was able to have resources to find out more about the Flanagan family, but also other families that own property as of 1882 in Prophet, Virginia. And so the Flanagans, they have owned land in Prophet since 1882. And I have a copy of the deed, the land deed, as well as the will of my great-great-grandfather He purchased the land along with one of his sons, Washington Flanagan. And so even to this day, we still have about 3 acres of the land. But the issue, unfortunately, is heirs property and trying to deal with property taxes and who's responsible for the property, paying the property taxes. I've been doing it for 17 years, but unfortunately, we don't have other family members who have interest. And I'm living off of retirement income, so it's now becoming to a choice. Do I continue to pay the property taxes, or do I unfortunately have it to go into foreclosure? And that's what's happening to a lot of our land today. We have these heirs property where it's not entitled by one person, but other members of the family. And no one has the right to sell the land unless the family agrees totally, and you're not going to have that to happen. But anyways, we still have on the property the cemetery where many of the family members are buried, which I knew about that. It's right behind Evergreen Baptist Church there in Prophet. And so I was able to record a number of the headstones there in the family cemetery. They're still on the property, some of the family structures, houses that are dilapidated right now. And so the resources that I was able to find include pictures of family members. I was able to find on website under the Carter G. Woodson Institute. They have a number of websites that lead you to information of enslaved individuals in Virginia and on certain plantations and names and records of family members. So Carter G. Woodson Institute at UVA is another great resource where you can find a lot of information on family history as well. And this website, as I had mentioned before, that we developed from this grant, it took about, I think, 2 years to develop the website. And it tells the history of Ned Brown, who was one of the first ones to acquire land and profit. It's some history information about his family, the Flanagan family, the Payne, Jim Payne and his family, a number of families that started purchasing land during the 1880s. And so a lot of that historical information is on this website. And it's also a website that you can use to look at how the research was done, how we interviewed family members who were alive back in 2000 and 2001. We interviewed family members in Prophet, the Flanagans, the Browns, the Paynes, a number of family members. We have transcripts of those interviews at this website, as well as we have pictures, we have family trees showing the family members and the connection and those who are alive and those who are deceased. And so this research project allowed me to learn more about the Flanagan family, not only my family, but other families in Prophet, Virginia. And presently there, right at Evergreen Baptist Church, there's a roadside marker that was dedicated June of 2000 to list the names of the first Black families that own land in Prophet, Virginia. And so that historical road marker has all the names of those who originated in Prophet, who first purchased land and who still have land there in Prophet today. And so based on the research I did in 99, 2000, 2001, then we finished the project in, I think, 2002. And again, this website is still available. And I sent a link to Marilyn to get on to the Prophet Online archival website that has a lot of information that you can use, and you can, as an example of how you can also do similar type research on family members. So that's pretty much the gist of how I got involved. I haven't done very much research since 2006, but now that I'm retired, I'm planning to continue the research. I do want to go back to Prospect Hill, where the Flanagans came from. I did visit it's a bed and breakfast now. I visited the location in 2000, and I was able to get a lot of the information on their brochure of Prospect Hill. In the brochure, they have a menu. There's a recipe for a dessert, and it's called Kate Finger's dessert. And what I learned was that was the recipe of the matriarch of the Flanagan, as they know, she's known as Mandy Kate. It was her recipe, and they still have it there on the brochure. the recipe for this dessert. And she was the one who developed that dessert, and they, of course, documented the recipe itself. And so I do plan at some point go back to Prospect Field to learn more about the records and get records. And I'm still trying to understand, why did they adopt the name Flanagan? Because if anything, it would have been Turrell, but since Richmond Turrell owned the Flanagans and his daughter Mary Minor, but for some reason they adopted the name Flanagan. I don't know if they were owned by a slave master named Flanagan or an overseer by the name of Flanagan, but you know, there are different reasons why enslaved individuals not only adopted the name of the slave owners, but others who maybe had connections with that particular enslaved group of individuals. Mm-hmm. So that's a quick overview.
Well, that was very wealthy right there, just to hear you speak of knowing that family land and it's still in the family. And you're doing your best to give highlights to it. My question too is there a family member, a younger generation that you could kind of take under your wing and work with? Because that's part of our journey, and things we need to put in place is to embrace the younger generation, help them to see how valuable this information is.
Right, absolutely. Yes, and I do have a niece who has interest, and she wants to take over the paying of the property taxes. And so we're still in discussion about that, because I want her, well, I've already have informed her that she doesn't have control in terms of deciding to sell it, because at some point I think we do need to sell the property if we can get what is known as a trusteeship, one person responsible for making decisions as far as what to do with the land, because eventually it's going to be auctioned off, because there's not enough interest from family members to pay the property taxes. And I know my niece, she may be willing to, but I don't know how long she will be willing to pay the taxes. And so if we have someone as a trustee, then that person will have the say-so, the proxy from other family members to determine what to do with the land itself. But we have to get family members to agree. And all it takes is one family member to disagree. And many times that person is not even willing to help pay the property taxes anyways, but they feel that if they're entitled to something and they're not going to benefit from it, then they're going to hold up the process.
Right. I think many of us know someone or have the situation in the family of property and coming together with other family members in order to have settlement. But one of the things I want to throw out is I became aware of establishing a family foundation. There may be something in that will help defray, rearrange things financially. And also, you may be able to get the support from Virginia State University. They are a land grant institution.
Oh, yeah, right.
And I know one time I did get consultants help for property and what to do with it, because it had timber on it. And so
right.
I know they can put you in connection with someone that is in the business as a nonprofit to help people keep their properties in the family.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yes, and we will talk on those subject matters at another time. And I'm hoping that sometimes in listening to our speakers, you can put a note in the chat as to some ideas you have and would like to have a program about. But we're going to talk further now with the opportunity to ask questions with our guests. Our guests, Larnell Flannagan and Kelly Navies. And I heard the name Pondexter, and it's just amazing to me. It makes me think about the migration pattern of family members. Pondexters, I grew up with them in Alta Vista, Virginia. That's a hop, skip, and a jump, but on that Route 29, is easily to get from Charlottesville to that Campbell County, Lynchburg, Alta Vista, Danville, Hurt, Gretna, and it just amazed me. So Kelly shared some information about family members in Indiana, family members in different places, that migration pattern. I'm like, wow. And you grew up, did you grow up on the West
I grew up in
Coast?
California.
Yes.
Yes, I grew
So
up in California.
it's amazing how family members moved around, and
Yeah.
Larnell has now come back. But if there are questions,
In a way, I've come back too, all the way back. Yeah. But I think it's interesting that he has a similar problem with trying to find out the why the family is using the Flanagan name, and I have a similar question about why the family is using Carter, why they didn't use Morris if they were on, Morris plantation.
Morris.
So that's really interesting to me as well. So that's a question I have. So hopefully we can resolve.
I have a question. Flanagan, Mr. Flanagan, you shared Terrell, and I was wondering, is the spelling of that Terrell, or am I hearing it wrong?
Right. I guess Terrell is more of a Northeast pronunciation, but Terrell is more of the Southeastern pronunciation. It depends on the region of the U.S. And so I had some friends who came back from New York and live in Charlottesville, and in Charlottesville we knew the name is Terrell, but they pronounce it Terrell.
Okay,
so,
I see.
Then that I still have that connection based on how they pronounce it, but it's Terrell as far as in the Southeast, but in the Northeast it's pronounced Terrell. But it's still Terrell. So it's Terrell as in the Southeast.
Okay, so, Kelly, do we have any questions in the chat box that you can convey?
There's no questions, but I have questions.
Go right ahead.
For Kelly and the Minor family, we need to connect.
Yes.
I actually work for the University of Virginia, finding descendants of the enslaved laborers who built the university. Dabney Minor, I just built out a tree and was just in discussions with supposedly descendants of the Minor family that's probably related to you, of the enslaved laborers.
Right.
And then I'm going to jump over to Larnell. I been working with Diane Brown for quite a while. All of her folks are prophet. And I put the link to the website you mentioned in the chat room, the UVA one that was done from the Virginia Humanities or whoever did that one. And that's in there. Right. And we've had discussions on that, on the Brown family and the names you guys. And I'm thinking, all right, these ancestors, I didn't go to bed till 2:00 this morning. and from doing our Freedmen Bureau Fridays, but the miners and the Prophet Historical District, the last 3 days is what I have been working on. And it's I didn't know what your topics were going to be on. And I'm thinking, them ancestors are messing with me right now.
Yeah, they're messing with all of us. They're bringing us all together here is what's going on. Yeah.
So I'm going to put my email in the chat. And if you guys will follow up, but we have a Facebook page called Finding the Enslaved Laborers at UVA.
Okay.
And you can see me talking about Dabney Minor, who is the slave owner, the matriarch guy.
Yes, well, that's the connection. That is the connection.
Exactly.
He has a daughter that's named Yes.
Mary.
Wow, what a small world.
Everything you guys said, it was like, oh my gosh, this is connection. So I'm going to put my email in there so I can put you guys in contact with the people, these descendants that are in the area. Some of them are not. And the Terrell, Regina Calloway out of Oakland, that's the line she's researching. That's her family. And there's a lady in Richmond. So it's just unbelievable. I'm just so glad I came today.
Put my email in there as well.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so here I'll put my email in, so then I'll be quiet now.
All right, well, that's fun.
Wait, who's someone put in the notes, who's a descendant of Richard Morris? Who's that? Oh, Stephanie Jones. Okay.
Yeah,
it's in the chat.
exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I not to put the link in. Boy, I'll just add in with Shelley. There are so many things I've done with the Morris and the minor links. I mean, we would love to have a discussion just around some of your Louisa County connections if y'all
Oh, yes.
would like to ever do that.
Oh,
And I got to
Yes.
do the profit ones too. I need to discuss.
yes, I would love. Yes, that would be something I would be interested in.
So where is
Participating.
profit in relationship? Is it in Louisa County?
No.
No.
Oh, it's in Allen County, outside of Charlottesville, 20
Okay.
minutes from Charlottesville.
So they're all
Right.
they're all close. They're all in that region.
Right, right.
Larnell,
And-
what county did you say Prophet was in?
Albemarle.
Oh, okay. Well,
Right.
that is so great. And I think that
Yeah.
you really have helped us to share the connection, visualize how we are all connected in some way, and it's coming back to Louisa. All roads
Right.
lead to Virginia, they say. But
Yeah.
I heard
Yes.
myself say all roads lead to Louisa.
Right, right.
It's so
So-
fascinating to me.
What I'm hoping to do after, the pandemic slows down a little bit, especially with this Delta variant, I live outside of Atlanta. I've been here
Yes.
since 2000. And so I plan to come up and spend a week in Charlottesville and then go out to Prophet and do some more research out there and come to Louisa County, because I'm still trying to make that connection, the genealogy understanding of the Flanagan name, how that name was adopted. And
Mhm.
so I'm hoping I can find some resources in Louisa that will lead me to that information by also going to Prospect Hill, because I know there's more information there about the Flanagans. I was told that 12 of the children left with Richmond Turl and Mama Kate to Prophet. But then there was one son that stayed there at Prospect Hill, and he's buried there in the enslaved cemetery there. So there's just so much more that I want to research when I'm feeling comfortable to come up and do the research.
Well, I just want to share this. The Louisa County Historical Society's African American History Program encompasses an oral history collective. We want to improve the archives by bringing in more of the African American community. It's a thing where, although it's very strong historically, there has not been enough African American data captured and housed with the archives. Now, part of the problem is, we recently got a grant to do this, capture this, but we need to have family members that are willing to talk about some of the history. Run into obstacles sometimes. The intent may be great with our program, and that's one of the programs, Oral History Collective. And we also hope to capture some of the local history of Louisa to provide that in the school curriculum for local school. And we also have the Freedom of Choice Remembrance Project of those 13 students that first integrated the Louisa County High School. Now, out of that, a historical marker will be placed in Louisa at a later point. We're just in the process of refining the text on that. But I want to open it up so that, if you have family members that are eligible, want to participate and talk, or you want to do an interview with them and share with our archives, we have Latika Lee that's also on this session, that is the oral history coordinator to work in the community to capture those oral histories. So pass that word along, share it.
Right.
I put in the chat box the website address, louisahistory.org. We are housed in the Sargent Museum at 214 Fredericksburg Avenue, Louisa, Virginia. We have a small research lab And conference room, I mean, but we may not have everything here, but we do have websites and connections and collectives that you can access information in. I'm Marilyn Campbell,
Wait,
Grant
Marilyn.
Program Manager over the African American History Program. And I've recently been serving as interim director, but I do want you to know that we miss Carlene Kowalczyk greatly. She got this program started. She's gone to other avenues to explore, but we have a new executive director coming in soon. And I just want you to know this is the kind of program we want to keep going. And if you have some ideas, please share, because we're at a grant writing phase where we want to put those things in place and we can use all the input that's necessary. So I will text in the box my number as well as the number here. With Louisa
Marilyn,
County.
I have
Yes.
a couple questions.
I can't hear you.
I have a couple questions.
Okay, wonderful, great, go ahead with those.
Okay, so Latika's asking, it's sort of an unrelated question. She said she's curious about the bookshelf behind Mr. Flanagan. Does that relate to any of your genealogy research?
No, it doesn't. Just books from my higher education teaching career.
Okay,
I used to be
I
a
think it's
university
fabulous too,
classroom.
Latika.
It is a great bookshelf. Yeah.
Very
thank you.
organized, though. That's what's so
Oh, yes.
impressive. Mine doesn't
Oh,
look
thank you.
like that.
Right. I pretty much know where everything is located, pretty much. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay.
You're like me,
The
I
next-
do too.
The
Right.
next question is directed to the Louisa County folks and about the Boxley surname, B as in boy, Oxley. Just how popular is that name? And I know there's a couple of us that have been researching that line, because Pallison Boxley out of Louisa was the slave owner, and he rented 6 individuals, enslaved laborers, to UVA. And so, and we're seeing so many different lines. So for Kelly, I don't know if the Boxley line has came up in any of your research.
It hasn't, no.
Louisa. Okay. Okay.
But another interesting thing that we should look at is the migration pattern from Louisa to Chillicoth, because John Langston, who you all are well aware of, also made that journey. He went to Chillicoth, Ohio, and George Washington Carter, his wife, he met her in Chillicothe. Well, he may have met her in Virginia because she came from Virginia also, but they married in Chillicothe, Ohio. So that's an interesting connection from Louisa to Chillicothe, Ohio, and there was a free Black community there.
Yeah.
So that's something that I think we could
That's
do
a
some more
great
research on
point.
as well. Yeah.
Because the Boxleys, some stayed, but then there was the migration out and ended up in Tennessee. And but they left like in the 1830s. I think it was 1835. And Marquita, you can correct me if I'm incorrect, but I remember, I know somewhere in Halifax, Virginia, got Louisa County, Virginia, but then they went, a line of them went to, I want to say Williamson, Tennessee. So you'll find a lot of the Boxleys there, but they went with the slave owner also and went there. So there's been a lot of research on connecting that as well. And also Elaine posted in the chat, there's a James Flanagan who died about 1760 in Louisa County. And they have the will and his inventory. And Elaine put her email in the chat. And if you like a couple of those pages, she said the museum at the Historical Society has the images there. And
okay, great.
what else?
Right.
The email was put in for the oral history that Marilyn talked about. So that's posted in the chat for the folks if they didn't see it, and the telephone number. And let me see what else. Marquita said her mic is not working, but it was Williamson County, Tennessee. And then looks like Marilyn posted the different phone numbers and the address to the Historical Society. I think that's the questions I see.
Right. Well, we have a copy of the chat questions and responses here.
I can make that available. I want to also say I'm retyping. I said 214 Fredericksburg, Virginia. I meant Fredericksburg Avenue, Louisa.
Avenue in Richmond.
Sorry, typing too fast. But yes, I can make that available. Fredericksburg Avenue. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for participating, coming out, willing to just stay the course, and know that we are here for you. We're a community resource, and it's a thing where Louisa has history. We want to compile, collect, ascension, and preserve, and have it as reference material for future generations. This is the purpose of this. So tell your family, this is a good thing. And we have people that are ready to interview, research for you, help you with projects that you may have and thought you couldn't have resolutions for. We can link you with someone if we don't know the answer. So just know that we are a resource and willing. Louisa, Virginia. Okay, I think we have done well for Saturday morning. Are there any other questions that you have? I'm sorry you couldn't be Ray. I don't know what happened, but we had another panelist as well.
This has been wonderful. It's been great. You know, you don't always have a whole house full of folks to enjoy yourself and to exchange information. So this is a great beginning, and I'm so glad to have been able to participate in this. So thank you so much for the resourceful information and for this time to engage and to learn more about how to go on this journey to learn more about our family members. So thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, the link to the Gail Hill book is also in there.
Yes.
He mentioned about the Gail Hill book. So I had put by Jasper Burns. So I had put that in the chat too, if folks were interested in what Larnell, when he mentioned Gail Hill Plantation.
Right, thanks. More information for me to research. Thank you.
Yeah, and I have a hill in the family too. So thank you. Thank you. This has been very, very informative. And these connections are very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, everyone stay connected, stay well, stay sane, and have a good day.
Take care.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. It was great.
All right.